Hello, everybody. What's happening? I'm Jesse Watson of Midcoast Permaculture Design. And today in this uploaded video for the Common Ground Fair's content library, I'm going to give an overview of permaculture design. And to be real clear about what I'm going to talk about permaculture as a system of design. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few techniques often associated with permaculture, but for the most part, I'm going to talk about permaculture in terms of landscape design. So this is what I do, Midcoast Permaculture Design. I'm based out of Rockland. I do landscape design and strategic planning, master planning for clients. And I also build some of these systems and facilitate their construction through project management. And I also teach the permaculture design process, the permaculture design method in collaboration with MOFGA and with the Resilience Hub. So this is what I look like. This is me wearing pants, and this is me in my traditional summer attire, posing, of course, on the campus of MOFGA, which unfortunately we're not able to be there now. But my advisors tell me that people like to know what I look like when I'm talking to them. So being as how we're on a computer screen, that's what I look like, just so you know. So before I talk about permaculture as a design process, as a philosophy of design, I want to just briefly talk about the questions that guide my work in permaculture, because really at the end of the day, this is sort of to answer the question why I do what it is that I do. So the guiding questions are, what makes a sustainable human habitat, a sustainable human settlement? Does it look like big cities? Does it look like a village? Does it look like an even smaller village? So what does that look like? What does the land say? If we develop the ears to listen, what does the land say about what a sustainable human settlement looks like? And furthermore, what can history tell us? If we look back to history, look at the history of civilizations, we find that civilizations as a broad pattern of human society are not very sustainable. So what types of human societies are sustainable? And we find durable, sustainable patterns of human settlement at the village scale and at the hunter-gatherer or horticultural society kind of level. And that's the backdrop that is the larger context within which I'm working and talking about some of these ideas. And furthermore, just to top it all off, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be alive? The anthropologist Wade Davis says that the emergence of human culture is the response to these last two questions of what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be alive? So some definitions about permaculture. By and large, it is primarily a framework for land use design and master planning. Permaculture design is about the design of regenerative land use systems. So it is quite fair to talk about permaculture in terms of landscape design and master planning, but there's more to it than that, okay? Many of you may be attracted to permaculture based on the techniques and farming practices that are the gardening and farming practices that are often associated with permaculture. These practices can come from all over the world and throughout history, but permaculture doesn't invent these kinds of practices. It adopts them and sort of incorporates them into this umbrella, this big umbrella kind of idea. Permaculture also has philosophy and worldview elements to it. For example, one worldview component is that people are a part of nature, not separate from nature. So I'll just leave it at that for now. Permaculture is also a global movement. It is present on every continent. And it is also an emergent profession in design, in construction, in landscaping, in education, as well as in primary production, like farming or nursery production or something like that. So to be clear, permaculture is this multifaceted thing, but for purposes of what we're going to talk about for this presentation, we're mostly going to focus on the process of permaculture design. Now, permaculture, what sets permaculture apart from other design disciplines is that it is it's an ethically bounded and it adheres to a set of design principles. So it's a principled method for ecological or regenerative land design. It's ethically bounded, and it bases a lot of these principles and ethics on patterns that we see in nature. So at the core center of permaculture is these ethics, 3 or 4 ethics, depending on how you want to look at it. So 4 ethics that I like to talk about are the care of the earth, care of people, sharing of surplus, and awareness of limits. These are the 4 ethics of permaculture: to rebuild natural capital, to take care of self, kin, and community, to share surplus in fair and equitable ways, and to maintain an awareness of the limits to ecosystems and our own selves, and just broadly an awareness of limits. That's the core feature of permaculture. The next layer out, kind of like a layer of an onion, if you will, are these principles of design. Some principles that we'll talk about is like catch and store energy, or using the edge effect, something like that. These principles are observed from patterns in nature. So patterns in nature are incorporated into permaculture design in this way as well. The next layer out is strategies that we may form to achieve goals. And the final layer out is this layer of techniques and practices like swales and sheet mulching and hugel and stuff like that. Sheet mulching alone, herb spirals, swales, hugel, all by itself alone, just because you use these techniques does not mean that you're doing permaculture. Just saying. Permaculture is really about the design, the abstract thinking process that underlies the application of these techniques. So like I said, permaculture for the most part primarily is about this process of design, and it begins with setting goals and moves on to site evaluation before we get into applying the design principles to meet the goals and meet the goals in accordance with site conditions in an elegant fashion before we move on to design and installation and so on. But primarily the idea that I want to get across today is that it is a process of design thinking, and it is kind of this idea of thinking in layers, designing in layers. When we come up with some kind of a design artifact, a map that we produce for clients, there's multiple layers of information at play for any given map that we produce. It begins with a base map that might include an aerial photo, it might include topography, it'll include hydrology, how the water is behaving across landscape, landform, might also include existing vegetation layers, before we get into the final planting plan and the final palette or suite of species that we might recommend to be involved in a food producing ecosystem. But again, it's a process of design with many layers of information at play at any given time. So it begins, permaculture begins with a base map. It's a very simple line drawing with not a lot of visual information on it. And then we move on from the base map to include some kind of ecological analysis of the site that involves the movement of sun, the movement of wind, movement of water, existing vegetation, wildlife, and various ecosystem dynamics at play on the site, so that when we merge the goals with the existing site conditions, we come up with some kind of an elegant plan. Another prominent feature to the permaculture design method is this concept of zones of use. So zones of use is like the more high maintenance, species, put them closer to the back door, and the less maintenance goes farther away. So zone 1, for example, that's where you might put the annual garden. Zone 2 is farther away. That might be where you put your small fruits, soft fruits, and bush fruits and stuff like that. Zone 3 is farther away. Maybe you only visit zone 3 once a week or something. That's where you might put the forest garden, which requires much less in the way of ongoing maintenance. So there's zones of use. We also talk about earthworks, how to manage water as it falls across landform. Access and circulation is also an important feature of the design of these whole systems on landscapes. Permaculture is about the design of whole systems. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, which is the planting plan. A lot of people are very excited they want to jump right into the planting plan before thinking about earthworks and water management, access and circulation. But suffice it to say that the actual planting plan does fall further down the list, and there are some steps that we like to take before we get to the actual planting plan itself. While we got a few minutes here, I also want to talk a little bit about some of the techniques involved with permaculture, like water management and earthworks. One case study that I want to highlight is the Maine Heritage Orchard, which is on Crosby Brook Road, right down from MOFGA. This photograph, I think, was taken in 2015. It's an aerial photo. It involves terraces. It involves water catching swales. It involves deep mulches of wood chips and hay. It involves cover cropping, composting, and then the stewardship of basically what is going to wind up being an apple forest. It is an orchard right now, but it's going to turn out to be a forest of apple trees when it's all said and done. That's an aerial photo from a couple years ago. I think this is from 2018. Just as a background, just to review, when we broke ground on the site in 2013, it was a moonscape. It was very much sand, marine grade sand, not a lot of vegetation to speak of. And within a couple of years, we were able to bring back perennial meadow species with these terraces that passively catch water and store it in the soil. That was, I guess I'll back up here and just show you that this terrace system of apple trees, this is what is at play in the Maine Heritage Orchard. With these terraces, we cut these deep swales, fill it with wood chips. It catches and stores water in the soil matrix and allows for a reservoir, if you will, of water in the soil matrix that the apple trees can drink off of for longer periods of time. So in terms of managing water, here's a few practices you could do at home. Again, catch and store is the design principle when we think about water management. It can involve decompaction, first and foremost, decompaction of soil using some tool kind of like the broad fork as seen here, or swales that are shallow ditches on contour. Maybe they're off contour, but these shallow ditches catch water when it falls and then lets it percolate into the soil. Another example of this design principle of catch and store would be rain gardens, where you've got you catch rain off of a roof into a downspout, slow the velocity of water in some kind of a rock bed into some kind of a rain garden in the lower right hand corner, or a pond lower left hand corner. And of course, everybody's favorite, one of the favorite techniques nowadays is what people call hugelkultur. And it's basically a pile of rotten logs with a blanket of organic material, soil, and mulch and stuff on top of it. What I'll say briefly about hugelkultur is that, number one, it is a construction project. It requires a lot of labor to build it correctly. You don't want to build it too loose, because you can get rodents and yellow jackets living in the voids. If you have too many voids, you want to make sure that when you construct these hugel beds, that you fit your pieces of wood close together and then fill the gaps with soil or mulch or something like that. So anyways, that's a brief primer on hugelkultur, and let your fingers do the walking if you got more questions. Brief overview here of my place where we live in Rockland. We started out with just a regular old yard with lawn and some random conifer tree. We do live on a hillside, and I began using the design principle here is small and slow solutions. So I strong-armed a few of my buddies, and they came over and we dug some swales by hand. After observing the swales for a year and deciding that they were a benefit to the landscape, then I rented an excavator and cut terraces on this hillside slope in Rockland, and we'll look at some more pictures of that now. So it looks, I guess, aesthetics, one point here is that aesthetics drive the management regime. If you like a manicured aesthetic, then that will drive your management decisions. In my case, I don't mind a rewilded look to the landscape. I don't mind a feral or farmy look. And so kind of the ecosystem or the aesthetic of the landscape that I'm cultivating is one of, it evokes the aesthetic of a woodland ecosystem, where we've got, woods and perennial herbs and shrubs with meadow in between. In agroforestry terms, it's called alley cropping. And let's see if we can see that here. So this is just I'm just going to let this run while I'm talking at you. And so you can see we've got some terraces here and various types of shrubs placed on contour, different kinds of perennial tree and shrub crops. This here happens to be seaberry, which is a nitrogen fixing, berry producing shrub, alongside peach trees in this case. And the kind of what I'm cultivating here, again, it's perennial food producing crops. That is the focus, so that the management style, it's low maintenance, and harvesting looks like hunting and gathering. So when I go out to harvest some food crops from the landscape, I'm basically going out and foraging here and there. I've got meadow, I leave some space for wildlife. You saw the milkweed just a second ago. And even if I've got a tree like this is a Bradford pear. I'm not overly excited about a merely ornamental pear tree, but I did graft onto it. And so it's a Calorie or Bradford pear with some Asian pear scion grafted onto it. These are some examples of perennial polycultures in the understory. They're overgrown and kind of weedy, but in the understory, we do have herbaceous perennial crops like Turkish rocket, good King Henry, nettles, and so on. And that's in the understory between a couple of fruit trees. So I have fruit trees in one alley, hazelnuts, as you can see here, in another alley. And then in between is meadow, which I maintain using a scythe. And so in agroforestry terms, that's called alley cropping. And that's one way that that I manage that's how I kind of tend my terraces is in that way. And again, like I said, aesthetics drive management. For me, it winds up looking a little bit jungly, but it's an edible jungle at that. And at every layer of the forest garden, there is some kind of a vegetative element, a tree, shrub, or herb that is performing some kind of function, whether that is wildlife habitat, nitrogen fixing, or whether it produces some kind of direct edible product for us, whether that's a fruit or nut, berry, or something like that. This idea is called polyculture. It is the intentional cultivation of many species together at the same time in synergistic ways. If you'd like to learn more about polyculture design, I'm doing a live stream on that during the fair itself. But anyways, this is a still photo of the forest garden in like early summer or something, and you can see that it's pretty jungly looking, but at every level of this jungle, there is something that we can forage for food. And it doesn't require inversion tillage. It doesn't require this is a food producing ecosystem that sequesters carbon instead of off-gassing carbon periodically through inversion tillage. And here's an example of different crops that we might get out of it. Habitat and food for chickens, habitat and food for wildlife like monarch butterfly, fruits, nuts, grain crops, eggs. I mean, it'd be a long list if I sat here and thought about some crops that we got this year. I mentioned, leaf crops in the form of nettles, good King Henry, lamb's quarters, stuff that I don't have to plant every year. Plenty of leaf crops, plenty of berry crops, raspberries, blackberries, currants, plenty of fruit crops, apples, peaches, plums, and nut crops in this case would be hazelnuts, as well as ecosystem function, like nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs, as well as habitat plants like that milkweed that I showed you. I leave milkweed for the monarchs, and a variety of other native species as well. So I guess something you can do if you're interested in permaculture, you want to think about it more. Some things you can do include, making a big, in permaculture design, we make a big deal about observation. I didn't talk about it so much today, but observation is the primary tool that we use in permaculture design. And then set goals, write them down. What do you want to do? Where do you go? Why? What do you like to eat? What are you good at growing? These kinds of things. Think about your goals, write them down. Design on paper, use small and slow solutions, build in phases, don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't plant more plants than you can irrigate in a season. If you plant a thing, make sure that you irrigate it and keep it alive, and so on. And if you'd like to learn more, you can always look me up on the internet. And okay, you can find me on the internet here, send me an email, find me on Facebook, I guess, if you want. And if you'd like to learn more, of course, there's also classes that we teach. We're going to teach an online intensive that's going to begin sometime in October. And you can find out more about that. Like I said, I'm collaborating with the Resilience Hub on this class, and you can find out more about that at main-pdc.com, my website, midcoastpermaculture.com, and the Resilience Hub website as well, resiliencehub.org. All right, everybody. Well, thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you at the fair next time. The next time is. Thanks, people.